to have today off.
Oh, nice.
Oh, you had weekends off too.
Summer.
76 weekends in a row you had off.
11:06.
Oh, I sure did. Let's see.
21 on the 18th, February.
But Monday
18th.
was-
Yep, I did forget it. Oh.
What's that?
I was
Monday was
looking at
crazy.
Julie and Casey's.
Why is that?
I was like, okay,
You were
next
down
birthday I have to
noses
remember.
all day.
It's not until,
Yeah.
April.
That makes
so
it
that's good.
challenging.
Nope, I missed it.
Well, he was sick. I told him, I said, that's your here, but I said, I had to write a check. I'll have the money in the card.
I got 7 o'clock on my watch.
So,
Ish.
Tuesday.
59.
59. All right, we'll give it a little bit longer here.
wow, where is our class?
I don't know.
Class is dying.
Small crowd.
What?
Small crowd tonight.
Small crowd tonight.
They probably all had to take the bus.
We
The
can
bus is
talk
late.
a lot.
Let's do it. Let's just throw it open. John, you wish you were still in Africa?
I forgot.
I'm sure.
It's cold
Well,
today.
It's cold.
I felt
Yeah,
bad for
probably tomorrow
expecting
morning when it's, they say 10.
Are you serious? Tomorrow morning?
it.
Isn't it what I heard this morning?
Wow.
Say now.
It's not like he's gonna answer anyway. There's kids, 3 of them.
Thought I heard maybe.
They
How do you
don't,
know?
they don't answer, they don't,
Might have heard wrong.
they don't even return text, so.
Maybe that nice morning.
All right, let's start.
You never catched it yet.
We are fading fast, but thank you for being here tonight, and grateful to have a few of you here. So if you are watching online, welcome to those of you that are online. We do have our last class next week, so that will be it for the semester. And the reason for that is I need a week to prep for Malawi, and then I'll be in Malawi and then on spring break, and after that, no one wants to come anyway. So weather gets nice, and so we're gonna call it after next Wednesday. So come back next Wednesday, the 19th, and we'll wrap up Revelation 22, and then be done with our study of Revelation. So yeah, it's been good. It's been fun to walk through this book. And as I said last week, if you have a topic that you'd like to explore next year, we're not quite sure what next year is going to look like yet, but if you want to continue, we're willing to continue if you want to.
Isaiah.
What's that? Is that a yes?
No, Isaiah.
Oh, Isaiah. Oh, okay. Whew.
I'm never going to let up on that.
66 weeks, 66 chapters. I don't know if I can handle that. We'll see.
Anybody could, it'd be you.
We'll
See, he
see.
was supposed to preach Romans until the day I died. So either I died a week ago,
Or you got more preaching to do, buddy.
Yeah, right.
or I said I would let him off if he would preach Isaiah until the day I
Hey,
died.
I did 136 messages. I
Very
was talking
good.
to another friend who did it in 32. He did all of Romans in 32 messages. We did 136. And I was reading Boyce, James Montgomery Boyce. He did 239 messages. He did 103 more than I did. So I have no idea. He's
Preached it for a few years.
yes, yeah. Lloyd Jones. Oh, your fault. Lloyd Jones died in Romans 14. He was working his way through and died in Romans 14. So I feel good. At least he'll have made it through Romans 16 and not have died somewhere along the way.
To be 49.
Yeah, I made it to 49, so thankful for that. So yeah, if you have some topics, Paul made it through, yeah, because he wrote it. But if you have something you'd like to talk about, work through starting next fall, let me know, and we'll add that to the list and just kind of consider it for next fall. So, yeah. Hi, Rachel. Come in. Welcome. Welcome. Hey, Lauren. Good to see you.
I know, I'm a little MIA, sorry.
No, that's all right.
It's not because I love Revelation.
Glad you're here.
Yeah.
All right, so you have Revelation 21 notes on your desk and Revelation 22 notes from the MacArthur Study Bible for next week. So let me pray, and then we'll begin. Lord, thanks for a great time in this book, and thank you so much for teaching us, and thank you so much for the things we've learned along the way. It's been hard and challenging at times, and yet it's been wonderful just to immerse our minds and hearts in this incredible book that promises how everything ends. And Lord, tonight we come to really the encouraging section and the hope that is ours as believers, and new heavens and the new earth and the eternal state. And Lord, we look forward to that day with great anticipation. And so we pray that our hearts tonight will just respond with wonder, love, and praise towards you, and a sense of hope and a sense of confidence in our future. And thank you for these precious promises that are ours for those of us who are in Christ. And so we thank you for this. Bless our evening and bless our time together in your name. Amen. I wanted to follow up on one thing that was talked about last night. Rachel, you asked last week. Rachel, you asked a question about in Revelation 20, where will the people come from who join Satan's rebellion? Remember your question? Yeah. And we tried to work through that, and I'm not sure I gave a great answer on that. I was thinking back again and just kind of thinking through the covenants that God made with Israel, and maybe perhaps some of the children of the Israelites over the millennium will rebel, but the more I thought about it, I'm not sure that's the case. As if God fulfills his promises to the nation of Israel, and those promises come to fruition in the millennial kingdom, then perhaps they don't ever fall away, even the children of them. So as I was thinking through that, and actually someone sent me a text on this as well that further thought provoked my thinking on this. Go back to Revelation 20, and I'm just wondering, I'm just thinking this out loud. In Revelation 20, verses 7 and 8, it says that after the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war. The number of them is like the sand on the seashore. So I, just in thinking that through, wonder if that's the answer to our question. Where do the people who join Satan's rebellion come from? They come from the nations. And who are the nations in Scripture? Gentiles. So believers who join Satan's rebellion are from Gentile nations. Because verse 8 goes on to say that he gathers them together, specifically those who are deceived among the nations. So I think that might be a better answer to your question, that it may not be children of the Israelites who join that rebellion. It may actually be Gentiles who participate in that rebellion. Again, I guess we'll have to wait to find out till we get there. But that might make it a little bit more sense. But any thoughts? Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember now back. I didn't get a chance to go back and look at the New Covenant notes, but I knew that the promise was with Israel, but I thought it also applied to us too. Not the church, because we'll be gone, but is that so? Like the New Covenant is just for Israel. It doesn't really, like when Christ comes back, it's fulfilled with Israel.
Correct.
We just have the benefits of it
Now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We participate in the blessings of the New Covenant, but the New Covenant is not fulfilled in the church today. The New Covenant will be fulfilled in the millennial kingdom when the nation of Israel repents and believes and receives their Messiah. So the full and final fulfillment of Ezekiel 36 and Jeremiah 31 takes place in the millennial kingdom when the Israelites believe and welcome their Messiah. So yeah, I think, the more I thought about it, I think perhaps those people that rebel with Satan are Gentiles who are outside of the nation of Israel. So, yeah, go ahead, Lauren. Were you going to say something as well?
Maybe. So the new covenant isn't until true. I mean, because people talk about like we're in the new covenant. Like, do they mean two different things? Are there two different kinds of new covenants? Like,
That's a good question. So some dispensationalists used to teach that there were two new covenants, that there was a new covenant for Israel and a new covenant for the church. I think that's wrong. I don't think the scriptures dichotomize the new covenant. There's one new covenant made with the nation of Israel. However, Jesus inaugurated that new covenant. Remember, he says, this is the new covenant in my blood. Do this in remembrance of me. So the new covenant was inaugurated by the work of Christ. And Hebrews 8 tells us that we're in the new covenant. Paul in 2 Corinthians 3 says that He's a minister of the new covenant. So some elements of the new covenant are in place today, but not in the fullest, final, full fulfillment sense. So I would say it's inaugurated today. It's not fulfilled today. So we have some of the blessings of the new covenant. The law of God is written on our heart. We have the Spirit of God. We are his people. That's all true today for us who are the church. But the covenant was made not with the church. The covenant was made with Israel. And so we have to believe that the fullest fulfillment of that new covenant takes place in the future with the nation of Israel. Make sense? Okay. All right. Let's go to Revelation 21, and let's pick it up here. So we've got 2 chapters to go. Tonight, 21. Next week, 22. And I have to congratulate those of you who are still here. You've made it through the worst stuff. You've made it through the tribulation. You've made it through the return of Christ and the Battle of Armageddon and all the slaughter there. You've made it through the final rebellion at the end of the millennium. And everything from here on out is good. There's no sorrow. There's no more sadness. There's no more, opposition, any of that stuff. So Revelation 21 and 22, for the most part, deal with the new heavens and the new earth. And so that's where we're at in the timeline. Again, we think that the book of Revelation should be read chronologically. And so we're just kind of moving right along in the chronology. So we've come through the tribulation age, the second coming, the millennial kingdom, great white throne judgment, and now we come to the new heavens and the new earth and the eternal state. So we are now dealing with the final 2 chapters of Revelation, and we're dealing with this description of what the eternal state is going to be like, what forever and ever and ever and all eternity is going to be like. So at the top of your notes on page 1, third bullet down, the Bible presents the new heavens and the new earth as the final destiny of redeemed humanity. This fallen planet, as it is now, is not our final destiny. So the place that we will live for eternity is not this fallen planet as it is today. You've noticed the next bullet, nor is the intermediate heaven our final destiny. So if you were to die today and go to heaven and be with the Lord, that location, wherever your soul goes, when you go to heaven and you're with God in heaven, that intermediate heaven, that place is also not your eternal destiny. God did not design us to die, to go to heaven, and live perpetually in a spirit state without a body. He didn't create us to do that. What did he create us as? Body and soul, right? He created us together, body and soul. So we have to believe that he has also designed us for eternity to have body and soul and to dwell in that state for eternity. So as wonderful as it is for you and I to have this hope that if we were to die, we're going to go be with the Lord. That's what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5. He says it's better to depart and be with the Lord. If this temple or this tent is torn away, I will be at home with the Lord. So as wonderful as that thought is, if you die today, you go to be with the Lord. That's wonderful, but that's not your eternal existence. That's not how you're going to live forever. That you're just going to live in that state until the rapture comes. And then you get a body for 7 years, and even in that state, you're not going to be living there forever in heaven in a glorified body. So all that to say, God has designed you to live in a redeemed body on a redeemed earth with heaven and earth joined together. That's what's called the eternal state. And that's what we're talking about here in these 2 chapters. So 5th or 6th bullet down, the believer's ultimate hope and destination are not the current heaven or even the current earth. It's the new heavens and the new earth. For now, heaven and earth are separated, but one day they will be merged when God's heavenly abode will be merged with a new universe for a perfect dwelling place that will be our home forever. So what you're ultimately looking forward to is not heaven. You're ultimately looking for a unified heaven and earth, which is our eternal state. So we're kind of splitting hairs a little bit, but I think we have to be clear on that, what our true hope is as believers. Our true hope is not heaven as the intermediate state. Our true hope as believers is new heavens, new earth, living on a new heavens, in a new heavens and on a new earth, when they're combined and they become one. Does that make sense? Questions? What are you thinking?
So if the new heavens and the new earth are combined, will it be still a globe like we live on right now?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And if it's not, I mean, we can go back and forth.
Yeah. Well, some of this we're going to cover here in just a little bit. I think the short answer would be I think it will be a globe. I think that's how God created it initially. He did create it initially that way, as a globe. Whether it's going to look like our current state, I don't think so. I don't think you're going to have the current geography that we presently know as wherever there's a map. You look at a map, I don't think it's going to be that. I don't think it's going to be anything recognizable. Now the question, part of the question behind what you're asking is there going to be a renovated heaven and earth or a recreated heaven and earth? In other words, is God just going to kind of revamp what we currently see and make it better? Or is he going to completely destroy this heavens and earth and start over from scratch? If we have time tonight, we're going to get to that question, and I have an answer for you on that one. But I do think it will be a globe. I think that's how God created it initially. And so Job says he hangs the world on nothing. And Psalm 19 talks about a circle that God has inscribed. And so I do think it will be that. But it's going to look entirely different than what we currently know it as. Yeah, Bill?
So our final destination, heaven, is that with the New Jerusalem?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Our final destination is the New Jerusalem, but the New Jerusalem is the capital city of the new heavens and the new earth. So it's both and. It's the capital city that we're looking forward to, but that's going to be housed on a new heaven, in a new heaven and on a new earth. So, yeah. Someone else was going to say something? Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
When you're talking about, people, will say, I know the Lord, and I know I'm going to heaven. They have limited knowledge of this. But
Correct.
we, sitting in this class that have heard this material, have more knowledge.
Yeah.
So how do you encourage, you just encourage that person to have a good walk with the Lord, a good fellowship?
I mean, if that person's a believer, in a sense what they're saying is true. Our hope is heaven. We're looking forward to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. If I die today, I'm looking forward to being in heaven. So I don't think the statement is wrong, but it could maybe use some clarification. When we say that, we mean, or we should mean, that our ultimate heaven that we're looking forward to is the one described here, not the one described in 2 Corinthians 5, where Paul talks about it, or Philippians 1, when he says to depart and to be with Christ is much better. That's not the ultimate heaven that we're longing for. It's this one that we're longing for. Now, I'm not sure how much you want to get into that in every conversation you have, and we can be the theology police and the doctrine police. And what do you really mean by that? Do you know which heaven you're looking forward to? It makes for a little awkward conversation. But yeah, I mean, if you wanted to be precise, you could have that discussion. What heaven are you ultimately looking forward to? Because this is the one that we should look forward to, ultimately. All right. Other questions, thoughts? All right. So middle of page 1, then, this is something that the Old Testament saints hope for. This hope for a new heavens and earth. And if you just look in some of these passages that I put here from the Old Testament, you can see a number of references in the Old Testament to what Revelation 21 and 22 talk about. So Psalm 102 talks about the heavens are the work of your hands. Even they will perish, but you will endure. So there's this idea in the Psalms that the present heavens are going to pass away. And he goes on to say they're going to wear out like a garment, like clothing. You will change them and they will be changed. So even the psalmist understood the fact that the present heavens as we know them are not permanent. They're not eternal. They're going to change. Then something's going to happen to them. And Revelation 21 and 22 describe for us what that is. Isaiah 65 refers to this new heavens and new earth. That's one of the two places in the Old Testament where that phrase is used, new heavens and new earth. The other one is also in Isaiah 66, a chapter later, for just as the new heavens and the new earth, which I make, will endure before me, so your offspring and your name will endure. So here's another reference. Two references in the Old Testament to the new heavens and the new earth. And so clearly the prophets looked forward to what is described in these chapters. And then Hebrews chapter 11 and Hebrews chapter 13 also describe this. Abraham, referring to the faith with which he lived, it says in Hebrews 11 that he was looking for the city which has no foundations, whose architect and builder is God. What is the city whose architect and builder is God? It's what Bill just mentioned. It's the New Jerusalem. And it's described in Revelation 21. That is the city. And Abraham, think about this. Abraham, 2,500 years before the time of Christ, was looking forward to that city. And we're still looking forward to it. It's been 2,000 years since Christ, and we're still looking forward to that heavenly city. Verse 16 of Hebrews 11 says, as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So this new heavens and new earth here in this section of Scripture, Hebrews 11, is called both a new city and a better country. Yeah, Lauren.
So I know that God, when God spoke to Abraham and said, I'm going to lead you to the land I'm going to show you, I'm going to make you a great nation, all that. Like, how much of this did Abraham really, did he know he was truly, he knew he was looking for a land and a place,
Yeah.
an actual, but like, did he understand the
I don't think so.
really all this? Probably not.
No,
but-
clearly he could not have understood the new city as is described in Revelation 21. There's no way he could have understood that. That's
So he just understood it as just a tangible, the land, tangible to him.
Well, I
He
think
didn't
he
really
understood that
understand.
he was heading to the promised land,
Mm-hmm.
but he also understood that even that promised land is not his eternal hope. He's looking even beyond the promised land. He's looking forward to what we're still looking forward to, the eternal heavens and the new heavens and new earth. So I think it's a both and. On one hand, he's moving to the promised land where he knows God is leading him, and that's going to be the place his people dwell. But his confidence was not even ultimately in that. His confidence was in something beyond that, even a heavenly city, a better country. And so
he had some understanding.
he had some understanding that there's something beyond that. There's something eternal. There's something better. There's something, but he didn't have all the progress of Revelation. He didn't have what Isaiah had.
Yeah.
The new heavens and new earth. He didn't have that. And he obviously didn't have Revelation 21 either, or 22. So he knew something of it, and he looked forward to it, and he had hope, and he desired it, but the specific nuances he didn't have. Yeah. And then Hebrews 13:14 says, we do not have a lasting city, but we are seeking the city which is to come. So we don't have hope in whatever city or place we reside on this earth. We are seeking the lasting city, the city which is to come. So that's still our hope today. So, thoughts? John, you're pondering something.
It's just something I've thought about quite often. What, and Scripture doesn't say, so it's just speculation, but it had to be something radically unique that God revealed to Abraham when he was an idolater in Babylon,
Mm-hmm.
for him to leave and obey
Yeah,
as he did.
yeah.
And we don't know the content of what visions, audible speech, whatever God did to reveal to him what he wanted him to do.
Yeah,
But it had to be pretty impressive to get the response of obedience
Yeah.
that he got.
absolutely.
So.
Yeah, you wish there was a little more white space filled in Genesis 12.
Might be bound up in when he called him out of Ur of the Chaldees.
Right. Yeah. I guess we'll find out in the new heavens and new earth, won't we? Or when we get to heaven. All right, well, let's dive into this then, and let's just kind of introduction. Let's dive into this now, and let's talk about what this new heaven and new earth is going to be like. So bottom of page 1, let's talk first about its appearance. Verse 1 says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea." So John begins by telling us, oh, by the way, verse 21, verse 1, "Then I saw." John, you mentioned this last week. This is one of those time markers and indicators throughout the book of Revelation that this is moving forward chronologically. So verse 1, "And I saw." And if you could read through the rest of this in the previous chapter, if you even look back in chapter 20, it's numerous times. Chapter 20, verse 1, "Then I saw." Verse 4 of chapter 20, "Then I saw." Verse 11 of chapter 20, "Then I saw." So these are chronological markers. It's moving us along in this, and so he's showing us what this eternal state is going to look like. So he tells us, first of all, that the first heavens and earth pass away. We're going to talk about, does that mean it's totally eradicated and he starts from scratch? Or does he just renovate? Does he refurbish this present earth? And so we'll hopefully get to that. But regardless, the first earth as we know it, presently as we know it, it's going to pass away in some sense. And the result will be a new heaven and a new earth. Top of page 2. This is new, not primarily in a chronological sense, but in a qualitative sense, meaning John's not just telling us what comes after the millennium or what comes after this earth. It's not just, okay, well, that's the next event in the order of chronology. He's saying this is entirely new, a new quality, a new kind, an entirely more wonderful and glorious heavens and earth that we presently know. And just a cross-reference here, and just maybe you can read this fairly quickly. 2 Peter chapter 3 describes this passing away of the current in heaven and earth. So let me just read it because it's very instructive. Peter fills in some details for us here. He says, "Know this first of all, that in the last days mockers will come with their mocking." He's talking about false teachers. "Following after their own lusts, saying, 'Where is the promise of his coming?' For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all continues just as it was from the beginning of creation." That's what these false teachers are saying. That's known as the doctrine of uniformitarianism, which says, hey, things have been going the way they've been going for millennia. You really think Jesus is coming back? It's been this way for thousands of years. That's uniformitarianism. It's uniform. It's just keeps going on. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. The oceans rise, the oceans fall. It's just uniform. Nothing's going to change. So that's what these false teachers believe. And then in verse 5, he says, "For when they maintain this, it escapes their notice that by the word of God the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water." And what happened with that water? Verse 6, "Through which the world at that time was destroyed, being flooded with water." So he says, you false teachers who think that everything's just going to continue on as it always has for millennia, don't forget Noah. Because they thought everything was going along too until, boom, suddenly the entire world was flooded. So he's sounding the caution here. But it's a little bit different. Verse 7 says, "By his word the present heaven and earth are reserved for fire, being kept for the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly men." So as opposed to the flood, which destroyed the world with water, it's going to be a fiery judgment that comes upon the earth in the future. Verse 8, "But do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like 1 day." In other words, you think everything's just rolling along like it always has. Thousands of years come and go. Thousands of years come and go. It's all uniform. Nothing's going to change. Jesus isn't coming back. Oh, but be careful. Because your time frame is not God's time frame. And your idea of the passage of time is not even close to God's, because he's outside of time. And so 1,000 years to him is like 1 day. So if you kind of think about this, I mean, how long has it been since Jesus came and said the world's going to be destroyed and Christ is coming back? It's been 2,000 years. In our mind, that's a long time. God's mind, nothing. He's outside of time. So he's not even affected by that. Verse 9, "The Lord is not slow about his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up." Since all these things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with intense heat. So that's what Peter says. Peter says how this is going to happen. He tells us it's going to be fire, it's going to be heat, almost like nuclear, kind of destruction here, but it's probably not a nuclear bomb as much as it is the very atomic structure of the entire universe coming apart. And that's, what is that, fission? That nuclear fission? It's everything ripping apart at the atomic level. That's probably what's going to happen. God's going to completely destroy the world through that fiery process. So, any thoughts on that? Yeah, Rachel?
So in verse 10, the day of the Lord will come like a thief. Which day exactly is that going to be? Because
Yeah.
I know in Joel, the whole book is about the day of the Lord.
Yep. So in our minds, we think day, just calendar day. Today it's February 19, 2020. We think of one day or a small period of time. In God's mind, the day of the Lord is a full encompassing thing that actually begins with the tribulation, extends through the second coming and the millennial kingdom, extends through the final rebellion to the time of the new heavens and the new earth, the creation of the new heavens and the new earth. So it's not a day, it's not a calendar day as much as it is kind of the full scope of all the end times events that finally bring about the eternal state. So when Joel talks about that in Joel, it's kind of encompassing all of that. Joel can't see all of that. He just knows there's coming destruction, and he knows that there's judgment, and there's going to be God's wrath poured out upon the earth. Well, think about all of the different points along the eschatological timeline that takes place. It takes place in the tribulation, that wrath. It takes place at the coming of Christ when he judges the wicked. It takes place at the end of the millennium when the rebellion is put down. And then the final phase of it is the recreation of the heavens and the earth. That's all the day of the Lord. So it's one big reality, not just a single event or a single day.
Is that true of all scripture, like when it refers to day of the Lord? Because Thessalonians talks a lot about, is that the same thing?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah. Now, sometimes they'll emphasize different phases of it, or they'll emphasize different parts of it. But when you think day of the Lord, you have to think all of that. And you have to think different parts of that. It's kind of like the analogy we used last week, I think, with the mountain, the valleys in between. When you look at a long ways away, you see this mountain range, and you can't see the valleys between those mountain ranges. You just see one big mountain. And so the day of the Lord, from a long distance off, looks like this one single event. And the closer you get, you realize, oh, there's a valley between that range, and there's a valley between that range, and it's all part of the day of the Lord. So, does that help?
A day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like one day.
Exactly.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So it can encompass a long period of time. But I would say the day of the Lord will come to completion after the new heavens and the new earth are created. So then you move into eternity, and the day of the Lord will be past at that point. So, yeah, Rachel?
Is there any resources that kind of piece in, so like books like Joel, kind of piece in like what Joel is saying in here into like where it might fit in Revelation, I guess, like when they have like locusts and I'm just curious if there's someone's ever done that where they've taken all of the kind of eschatological passages, whether it's Daniel or Joel or Ezekiel, and kind of put them in like kind of the timeline that Revelation's in, or no? Because I really struggled when I read Joel, being like, is this already happening? Because it's talking about like past Israel as in the past,
Yeah.
not Israel in the future, but it is future forward.
It's
so
both.
It's both.
It's
just-
both.
yeah, it's hard to really kind of wrap your
It
mind
is.
around like that book specifically. I really didn't like going through it, I'll be honest. But I was just wondering if there was like a resource or if someone has actually, under the lens of Revelation, kind of gone through Joel and tried to, or any of those books, I guess, and tried to piece them in
Yeah.
where they might fit. I don't know.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there's journal articles on the day of the Lord. I mean, I could do some research, or
Well,
off the top of my head, I don't know, but I could easily find some resources on the day of the Lord and what it is. And I'm not sure they've actually pieced and said, okay, this part of Joel 2 fits exactly with Revelation 19. I'm not sure it's that specific, but I know there's resources on the day of the Lord. Yeah. And the hard part about Joel is some of that's taking place at Joel's time, right? Some of that's the destruction coming from, I think, Babylon at that point. So that some of it's immediate, and then some of it's far off, which we're still looking forward to. So yeah, it's a hard book, but it's wonderful when you realize there's a near fulfillment and there's a far fulfillment, and that's what you have to get used to in prophecy. You just have to be okay with there's a near fulfillment of this and there's a far fulfillment of this. And I think that's even what you have in the New Covenant, which we were talking about before. There is a near partial fulfillment of the New Covenant, and then there's a full and final far off fulfillment of that covenant. And so you have to be comfortable with being able to know both the near and the far fulfillment. So Peter describes for us this doing away with the present heaven and earth, and fills in some of the gaps for us on what that's going to look like. It will result, though, in a new heaven and a new earth. That's what John's point here is in verse 1. It will be a new heaven and a new earth. Notice the last part of verse 1 says, and there's no longer any sea. Very interesting. There's no oceans. There's no sea. And so this is really remarkable when you think about the fact that 75% of our earth is oceans. I was swimming in one just a couple weeks ago down in Florida, and it's beautiful and it's marvelous and it's glorious. You can see all of the beauty of the oceans, but something interesting here in the new heavens and the new earth, there is no sea. Now, what does this mean? It doesn't mean that there's no water, because look just below that, in the little couple bullets below that, I put Revelation 22 verses 1 and 2 tell us that there's a river of the water of life. So we know there's water on the new heavens and new earth. So it's not like there's no water, but Revelation 22 describes a river coming out of the throne of God. So clearly there is water, and perhaps that water even flows into bodies of water. We don't know that for sure, lakes or something like that. But back to Revelation 21 verse 1, there is no longer any sea. What does that mean? I put this in the bullet just below that, 75% below that bullet. Some have taken this to mean that there will no longer be the cold, treacherous waters that destroy ships, separate nations, drown people, and poison people if they drink too much of it. To the ancient people, the sea was a fearful place because it claimed many lives. And so some take this simply as a metaphor for the absence of evil. The sea kills people. The sea sinks ships. You remember 7-8 years ago when that big freighter went down off the coast of Florida, or on the Bahamas. Remember that? Left Jacksonville, and they said, don't go, there's a hurricane coming. They went anyway, and this massive freighter went down in that hurricane. This is just a few years ago, and all the crew died. And the sea kills people. People drown in the sea. Sharks eat people. It's not safe. It can kill you. So some people think this is just a metaphor for the absence of evil, but I would lean toward taking this literally. There is no longer any sea, meaning there is no ocean. There is no sea. So you got back to your question, is it going to be like we know it today? No, I don't think so, because most of this world is oceans. And if that's literal, which I would lean toward, there's no longer going to be any oceans. So that means that this whole water-based cycle that we're familiar with on Earth, and the hydrological cycle, and water evaporating and forming clouds and moving over land and dumping rain, and that whole hydrological cycle, it appears, if this is literal, that all goes away. That's not there anymore. There is no hydrological cycle. There is no literal massive ocean bodies, which, if you go back to Genesis 1, that's the way it was, right? Now, there were bodies of water created, but initially there was a canopy of water that was around the earth. And the flood was caused by that canopy of water falling down. And our present hydrological cycle is now the result of that. But there was a canopy of water around the earth as original part of the creation. So anyway, let's just say it's going to be perhaps similar to how God initially created, although there does seem to be some waters in the beginning, because he did pull the lands together and then created the seas as well. So certainly there is that. Yeah, Rachel.
It's also interesting too that, like, I'd say the majority of the catastrophes that happen in our lifetimes have been caused by water, like catastrophic events
Yeah.
like tsunamis or hurricanes.
Yeah.
It's not even like shipwrecks. It's like the sea consuming the earth.
That's true.
almost. And so, and you can't stop it because, like, you've got tectonic plates moving, and that's not evil. It's just what the earth is doing.
Exactly.
So that has to stop if those in order for those natural disasters to cease, you'd have
Good
to
point.
essentially start over. There should be no
Yep.
tectonic plates.
Well, yeah, you have typhoons, which form over oceans. I mean, where do hurricanes form? They form over oceans. I mean, just go watch weather maps in September and October, and you remember watching these hurricanes form in the Atlantic and then swooping up the coast of Florida, and that's where those things generate, and tsunamis are generated over the water. So it's not, you're right, it's not just shipwrecks, it's the whole effect of the oceans that can end up killing a massive number of people. All right, so there's this new heaven and the new earth. What's it going to look like? We're not entirely sure, but there's apparently no oceans. Then verse 2 gets us into this capital city. Bill, you mentioned it earlier, so let's talk about this capital. Verse 2 says, "And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband." So he calls this portion of the new heavens and the new earth, part of it at least, is called a holy city, the New Jerusalem. And this is its capital. So not only do you have a new heaven and new earth, you have a new capital city called the New Jerusalem. And notice he says it's coming down out of heaven. In other words, it's been prepared by God. It's divine in its origin. It comes down. It literally descends from above and lands on the new heavens and the new earth. And that's going to be the capital city, the New Jerusalem. So what you have here is a description of the eternal state with a city. And I take this to be a real city. Now just think about this for a moment. What do cities have? Obvious. Cities have roads. Cities have buildings. Cities have culture. Cities have parks, entertainment, sporting events. They've got people out in them walking around. There's all kinds of, there's restaurants, there's theaters. These are cities. This is what's in a city. And so I don't want to read too much into this, but if you think of heaven or the eternal state as just kind of this nebulous, boring existence, I don't think that's the case. I think John here is using language that we're familiar with. There's cities, and there's a mountain that's described down in, where is it? In the same chapter, he describes a mountain. Verse 10, he describes a mountain. Over in chapter 22, verse 1, he describes a river. So I think that John is using language that we can relate to, and much of the new heavens and the new earth, I think, is going to be stuff that we're familiar with. It's not going to be this black and white, sterile, drab, sitting on a cloud playing a harp for the rest of your existence. That is not it. And that's what most people think of heaven. But he says it's a new city. I don't love cities. I'd rather be in the mountains, in a cabin by a creek with nobody around. That'd be my preferred place to kind of hang out. But there's some pretty cool things in cities, right? We went to a hockey game just last Sunday, and there's some great restaurants in downtown Grand Rapids, and there's symphonies that play in the DeVos place, and there's concerts. And so I don't know. I hope I'm not reading too much into this. And if you want to read more about it, you can pick up Randy Alcorn's book on heaven. But I think there's a sense in which life is going to be similar to what we experience here, just without all the effects of the fall. Yeah, Lauren.
Well, you think, if humans that are sinful and living in a fallen world can produce still things of beauty and enjoyment,
Yes.
things that we do enjoy. It's like how much more being how we really were supposed to be,
Yes.
and then living in full realization even then of who Jesus is and who we are, and there not being any effective sin.
Yes.
I mean, there's no way that, even if it does look really different, this is probably just a little taste of it, because there is sin, and
Yes.
we're not with Christ, and the reality of that it will be in heaven.
Exactly.
Or the new heavens and new earth. I don't know. That makes total sense.
It does.
It wouldn't just be this boring. He gave us the capacity to think and to create and to
Yep.
build and all the things that we do with our minds
Exactly.
and our hands, and I don't know. It just
Yeah, so think about everything that's wonderful about living in a city. And now put that in the perfect environment without any sin, no effects of the fall. I think it's even more wonderful than we can even fathom. I love riding my bike on the White Pine Trail. Yeah, White Pine Trail. It goes downtown. I love walking by the river. I love going to concerts. I love taking my wife out for dinner and walking around downtown, and I love all that. I think that's just a shadow. So if that's the shadow, the substance has to be so much better than that. So anyway, I don't know, I think there's something to look forward to here, that this is an actual place with culture and music and arts and athletics and activities and conversations and all those things. So I'll let you kind of play around with that in your mind a little bit and imagine what that will be like. But I think he's using the city here as an indication of what it's going to be like, an actual city, a real place with real people. He calls the bottom of page 2, he says that the city was made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. So here now you've kind of got the imagery of a wedding and a bride, and Christ is the husband, God is the husband in a sense, and this city is the coming of the final stage of the wedding. So that's what's going on here with this imagery. Top of page 3, this city is going to be described for us in very specific explanation in verses 10 to 27. So we'll come back and look at that in just a moment. You probably have a lot of questions what the city's going to be like. He's going to explain it for us and tell us what the city's going to be like. So hold those questions and then we'll come back and look at it. Notice next its reality. Verse 3, and I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. This is actually the best part of the new heavens and the new earth. I mean, I just spent a little time talking about the wonderful things that happen in a city. It doesn't even compare to this. This is the best part of the new heavens and the new earth. The fact that God is tabernacling among us. He is dwelling among his people. And so the reality and the joy of the eternal state is not just that it's a great place. It's that God is there among us, walking on this earth, metaphorically. He's here. He's with us. We're with him. He's made his home amongst us. His heavenly abode has now been fused with earth, and they're one. So right now, God's abode is in heaven. He dwells in the heaven, the third heaven. But there's coming a day when he's going to make his home here on this earth. I mean, think about that. Just think for a moment about that reality. In the eternal state, God's going to live here, right here, on earth. That's what it means when it says he's going to tabernacle amongst us, and he will dwell among them. So right now, earth and God's abode are separate. They're separate, not just by distance, but in totally different dimensions. But this says there's coming a day when his dwelling place will be here, and we will be here. He's going to pitch his tent among his people, and he will make this place, the new heavens and the new earth, his dwelling place. So I hope that gives you a little even more wonderful, glorious hope to look forward to, that we're not just looking to this ethereal place in heaven where we exist in spirit form for the rest of our life. I'm not excited about that. I wouldn't be excited about that. But this, living here on the earth with God in a full redeemed, glorified body in a completely redeemed heavens and earth, and I get to be in his presence because he's tabernacling among us. That's wonderful. Not saying I'm not looking forward to the intermediate heaven. I am looking forward to the intermediate heaven. But this is what we should really be looking forward to. Yeah.
It's interesting, the culmination of this verse at this point. One of the missionary colleagues that Tim knows in Africa, that they're in a different country, but the son of Dr. Foster, who is a missionary doctor, has written a book. It was just recently published. Tim got half a dozen copies.
Okay.
When it was first published. It's just a little paperback kind of book, but it's highly favored is the name of it. And he relates God's plan and so forth to the African people. And
Huh.
so it's written very specifically to the African culture. But the interesting thing is his emphasis on the covenant.
Hmm.
He's constantly following the idea of covenant throughout the Old Testament. And he points out how frequently the specific language or related language in the Old Testament is God's promise to Israel.
Hmm.
They will be my people,
Yeah.
and I will be their God.
Yes.
And right here it is.
Exactly.
And fulfillment.
In fact, look towards the bottom of page 3, because this is exactly what we're talking about, John. What is the great hope of the new covenant promises? Jeremiah 31, it's not only that he will put his law within us, and on his heart he will write it. Notice the very last part of verse 33 of Jeremiah 31. And I will be their God, and they will be my people. That's what you're talking about. That's it.
That's the phrase, and that's repeated in
Yeah.
those words or related words.
Exactly.
Dozens of times in the Old Testament.
Exactly.
So it's a strong emphasis throughout Scripture.
Yeah. Look at Ezekiel 37 as well. My dwelling place will be with them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people.
That's the
So,
right there.
is that true when we go to the intermediate heaven? If you died today and go to the intermediate heaven, is this true? In a sense, yeah. We're with God, and he's our God, and we're his people. But it's not in the fullest sense. Is it true in the millennial kingdom? Yes, it's true in the millennial kingdom in the sense that we're here and on earth, and Christ is ruling and reigning, and we're with him, and he's our Savior, and we're his people. It's not till you get to the new heavens and the new earth when it's here in its fullest sense. Because now God is actually dwelling here upon the earth, and he's made his home here. And so the fullest sense of the new covenant comes in the eternal state when he's actually here and we're here with him. So that's our hope. And that's what's being promised here. And so again, just don't let this be academic for a moment. Just think about the joy of this. Think about the wonder of this. Think about the incredible privilege that we will have as believers to walk on this earth and walking with God. He's here amongst us, his tabernacle, the place that he dwells and lives. Think about the Old Testament, the tabernacle. That's where his presence was manifest. And so Moses would go in and he'd be in the presence of God. Well, think about that now in a very real sense upon the earth, where the earth is his tabernacle. And wherever you walk and wherever you are, which is still true today, wherever we go, God is there. But even in a more profound sense, wherever you will be in the eternal state, you're in his presence, and he's there. It ought to just excite your heart, and it ought to give your heart a little glimmer of, man, I can't wait for that, and it's going to be far better than what we have even in this life. So, okay. Jonathan Edwards, let me just read this quote. I love this quote by Jonathan Edwards. Bottom of page 3, he says, God is the highest good of the reasonable creature, and the enjoyment of him is the only happiness with which our souls can be satisfied. To go to heaven, fully to enjoy God, is infinitely better than the most pleasant accommodations here. Fathers and mothers, Husbands, wives, or children, or the company of earthly friends are but shadows, but the enjoyment of God is the substance. These are but scattered beams, but God is the sun. These are but streams, but God is the fountain. These are but drops, but God is the ocean. So, if you enjoy your husband, your wife, your children, all the blessings that you have now, your friends, if you enjoy whatever this life has to offer, that's wonderful. Enjoy it. But those are merely the things that should make us long for heaven when we get to be with God. And Martin Luther said it well. He said, I'd rather be in hell with Christ than in heaven without him. And I think Piper has asked the question very well. Would you want to go to heaven if God was not there? The answer should be no, right? What if you could go to heaven with all the joys and all the wonders and all the splendor and everything that's wonder, all the perfections of heaven? Would you want to go there and God not be there? And this verse, I think, answers that question. The reason we want to go to heaven is because He's there. Not just because there's streets of gold and a tree of life that gives you a fruit of the month, and all the wonderful things that happen there. That's wonderful and that's glorious. But it's God. It's Him that we get to be with in His presence and be with there forever. So this is the joy that we have to look forward to. Yeah.
What's that gonna be like maybe with Jesus there? So there's gonna be Jesus, right? And God.
Eternal state?
Yeah. And the Holy Spirit. Would they all still three be will we be in the presence of all three of them, or is Jesus gonna I don't know if maybe there's an answer to this, but if God will be at this time, this will be the first time we'll be in His presence, truly His presence, but we'll also be in the presence of Jesus here. How does that work?
Yeah. I mean, you're straining at explanations here that perhaps we don't have all the details on, but Christ will be in His glorified, redeemed body.
Yeah.
So, and He'll be in that way in the millennial kingdom as well. So I guess in a sense He's going to be confined to that body, but the Father and the Spirit are spirit beings, so they're not confined to bodies. But somehow, in some way, we're in the presence of God for all time, for eternity. So, I mean, in a sense, we're in His presence now, but in a very real, more wonderful sense, we'll be in His presence for eternity. But I don't think we're going to. He doesn't have a body, so how we're going to perceive of that, I'm not sure. That's again why we're straining here a little bit to wrap our minds around this. How can you see and perceive someone who has no body? I don't know, but that's what it says.
So it'll be distinct. It'll be we'll know that they're different. We'll see Jesus, but we'll know that God's in His new tabernacle. So it'll still be they're distinct beings.
Yeah.
Essentially, not beings, but distinct
Persons.
Persons. Yeah.
Persons. Yeah. Good questions. I guess we'll have to wait till then to figure them all out. Notice on page 4, it's changes. The changes that we'll get to experience in the new heavens and new earth. And again, this is just so encouraging. Look at verse 4. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away. Verse 5, He who sits on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. And He said, Write, for these things are faithful and true. Then He said, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. So the first thing we learned, that there's going to be no more tears. No more tears in heaven. Wasn't there a song about that? Someone wrote a song, James Taylor, Tears in Heaven. That there literally will be no tears in heaven. Now, some people think when it says He's going to wipe away every tear from their eyes, I think some people think, well, they're going to arrive in heaven and they're going to be crying and God's just going to be so kind. He's going to wipe those away. He's going to give you Kleenex and He's going to kind of clean you up. That is not what He's referring to here. He's not talking about it. He literally means there's nothing in heaven that will bring about tears. And so The point is that God will completely obliterate the grief and the pain that caused tears in this life. So no sorrow, no sadness, nothing that will lead us to tears in heaven. So that's the first thing we learn about the changes of the new heavens and earth. There's no tears. Second thing we learn from verse 4 is that there's no longer any death, of course, because chapter 20 tells us that death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. So the greatest curse of all is removed. There's no death anymore. And just think about that. Even in the millennial kingdom, there's still death. People who die at 100 die at a young age. So there's still some death in the millennial kingdom. But when you come to the eternal state, there's no death. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. And we're so familiar with it. It's just the air we breathe in this life. I mean, people die every day, and every one of us have experienced loved ones who have died and passed away. And it's just such a part of our existence. It's almost hard to imagine outside of that. But we're going to live eternally with the Lord in a state where there's no more death ever. So just tremendous. And then notice also there's no more mourning, crying, or pain. Kind of goes along with the tears. But there's no suffering, there's no sadness, there's nothing that will bring us to mourning or crying in that life. So you can summarize all those negatives with verse 5 where he says, I'm making all things new. So all those things that bring us sorrow and sadness in this life are done away because he's making all things new. So again, suffering is just so much part of our life. Sadness is so much part of our life, and disappointment is so much a part of our life, and grief and sorrow is just so much a part of life on a fallen planet. It's just hard to think of life outside of that, but that's what this is going to be like. None of that. It's joy, complete joy. So I put this in the last couple of bullets in that section. This means that this life is the only hell Christians will ever experience. Just think, this is as bad as it gets for us. This is it. It doesn't get any worse for us. Now, for the unbeliever, the opposite is true. This is the best heaven they get to enjoy. But for us as believers, this is the worst hell we will ever have to experience. And so it really is a tremendous source of hope for us. So any thoughts on that? Changes, no more crying, tears, sadness, death, mourning. And then its residents, bottom of page 4, just very quickly, he describes those who will reside in heaven, in the eternal state. It will be those to whom he gives. To the one who thirsts from the springs of water, he will give to them life without cost. So he's going to satisfy them with the springs of the water of life, those who get to dwell there. And then those who overcome will get to inherit these things. And so there's those who are there are those who are overcomers, who have inherited eternal life. So an admonition for us to persevere. And it's not just your perseverance that gets you into heaven, obviously, but those who are truly the Lord's will persevere. They will overcome and will receive this inheritance. And then at the end of verse 7, it says, I will be his God and he will be my son. They get to receive full fellowship with God. So who are the residents of this eternal state? They're those who are satisfied with the springs of the water of life. They have overcome so as to inherit all these things, and they get to be with his God. So just a tremendous description of you and I. That's true. If you're a believer, those things are all true of you. In contrast to that, verse 8 describes its outcasts, who's not there. Top of page 5, and verse 8 describes those who are not there. It's really interesting to me that in a passage or a chapter on the eternal state, to contrast just how glorious this eternal state is, he lists for us who's not there. Verse 8, for the cowardly and the unbelieving and abominable and murderers and immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters and liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. So first death is physical death. Second death is eternal death at the great white throne judgment. So all those, top of page 5 here, all those who are characterized by those types of behavior don't go to the eternal state. If you're cowardly, which I think refers to you fall away from the faith when life gets hard. You apostate. you just heard of Josh Harris, guy who wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Just last summer, he apostated. He not only went back on his book and said, I wish I'd never written the book. He says, I reject everything I taught as a pastor. He apostated. I think if he doesn't repent and come back to the Lord, that's the kind of example of someone who's cowardly. Their faith was never genuine, and he showed it by apostating. I had something happen just last summer. Someone came over, and someone who I thought was a believer sat on my couch and said, I reject it all. I repudiate all of it. And he apostated on our couch. Obviously, he'd been working up to that point, but it all came out on our couch in August or September, and it was just tragic to watch someone. And I performed their wedding and did premarital counseling and thought for sure he was a believer, and he said, I reject all of it. Well, that person lacked endurance. That person fell away from the faith. And so that person doesn't go to the eternal state. Then notice the next one, unbelieving. Obviously, unbelievers don't go to heaven. Those who are abominable, those who live vile, polluted, detestable lives don't go to heaven. Murderers don't go to the eternal state. Immoral persons don't go to the eternal state. Sorcerers, which is our word, the Greek word pharmakos, where we get our word pharmacy. We have a pharmacist here. John, you would know this. Someone who used mind-altering drugs and occult practices, those who engaged in idolatrous worship and the occult and perhaps used mind-altering medications. The person who's dominated by that kind of thing, they're not a believer. They don't go to the eternal state. Idolaters don't go there. And people who lie. Not just who tell a white lie here and there. He's not talking about that. He's not talking about the fact that periodically every person tells lies. This is the liar, the one who's known for their lies. Their lifestyle is dominated by lies. They don't go to the eternal state. So it's just a marked contrast. Just, I guess, compare verse 7 with verse 8, and it's complete contrast, black and white, of who's there and who's not there. So, thoughts on that? All right, well, what about the New Jerusalem? What about this new heavenly city then? We need to dive into this for a few minutes, at least tonight, and look at this capital city. And the first thing we need to note is its glory. Chapter 21, verse 9 says, Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, I will show you the bride. He calls the city now the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven. Here it is again, coming down out of heaven. Now, notice verse 11, having the glory of God. Her brilliance was like a very costly stone, and a stone of crystal clear jasper. So here's this other description of this glory of this city coming down from heaven. Again, as I said, referring to its divine origin. God is the one who's created it and designed it and brings it to earth. And he calls it here the bride, the wife of the Lamb, meaning the city takes on the character of the redeemed. So the city is going to be inhabited by the redeemed who are God's people, the bride, his bride. And now the city is called the bride. So it's not just his people. In the church is normally called the bride, but now it's the whole redeemed people that God takes to be with himself in the city. And so the city itself is now called the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And then notice verse 11. Here's the key part of it. Having the glory of God. Having the glory of God. In other words, this city is illuminated by the glory of God. His majesty, all of the sum of his attributes. I'm on the top of page 6. The glory of God is the sum total of his attributes and is manifested as blazing light. So what is the glory of God? It's not just light. The glory of God is the manifestation of who he is. It's the manifestation, the sum total of his holiness, his purity, his sovereignty, his power, his grace, his mercy, his wrath, his justice. The sum total of God is his glory. And it is oftentimes manifested as blazing light. Just think about the Old Testament when God appeared to the nation of Israel, the Israelites, as they're leaving the promised land. What did he appear as? He appeared as a cloud in the day and as a pillar of fire at night. What happened to the temple when they made the temple? What came into the temple? It was the Shekinah glory, this majestic, glorious, brilliant manifestation of the glory of God. That's what this is here. And it's that glory that will illuminate all the heavens and the earth in our eternal home. Notice Isaiah 60 says, "No longer will you have the sun for light by day, nor for brightness will the moon give you light, but you will have the Lord for an everlasting light, and your God for your glory." I love that. Old Testament. Isaiah understood this. He understood that the sun would no longer be the primary light source someday. And what would be the primary light source? Isaiah understood is the glory of God. Look down to verse 23 of the same chapter we're in, Revelation 21, verse 23. It's the same thing. The city has no need of the sun or of the moon to shine upon it, for the glory of God has illumined it, and its lamp is the Lamb. I love that. What's the lamp of the eternal state? Christ, God, their glory, their majesty, their display of their attributes. Sorry, guys. I'm still coughing from being sick a few weeks ago, so I'll try and get through this. So there's no need for light anymore. Now, I think there's a sun and I think there's a moon in the eternal state. In fact, look at verse 23. We'll get to it in a little bit, but look at verse 23. The city does it say it has no sun or moon? What does it say? Has no need for the sun or the moon. So I still think that there's a sun and a moon in the new heavens and the new earth, but they're just not needed anymore because the glory of God illumines it. So just imagine that. Brilliance of God in all of his glory is more brilliant and more splendid and more glorious than the actual sun.
We love to see the sun.
But we do love
in
the sun.
Michigan, but seeing God in all of his glory
Yeah.
will be better than
Absolutely.
seeing a sun in Michigan.
And we saw it today, didn't we? For a little while. Yeah, Suzanne.
I think it's fascinating too because as we participate and partake in the eternal state, all it's going to do is bring him glory.
Right.
Because we're going to be enjoying what he's prepared for us, and it's just going to glorify him that much more. And
Yes.
It's just amazing because when you think about it, it's all centered around his glory.
Exactly.
And everything points towards it.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
So you understand there's two kinds of glory of God. There's intrinsic glory and there's ascribed glory. So his intrinsic glory is the glory he possesses himself. It's the emanation of his godness. It just who he displays himself to be in his character and the brilliance of his splendor. That's glory that emanates from him. That's intrinsic glory. And then in response to his intrinsic glory, we ascribe glory to him. That's ascribed glory. So when it says you should glorify God, or the angels describe or declared glory to him, that's ascribed glory. So his intrinsic glory is the basis for our ascribed glory. And I think that's what you're saying. In heaven, you have both. You have the intrinsic glory of God manifest in his illumination of his nature and the brilliance of his light. And then in response to that, all we're going to do is ascribe to him glory and give him the glory that is. Yeah, go ahead, Suzanne.
Can I just add, like, as you've been talking, I just keep thinking about how, we often go, why did God do all of this in the first place? If he knew man was going to fall, or he knew all these horrible things were going to be happening throughout history, like the Holocaust and stuff. But you look at, like, through the corridor of time to where it's all headed, and you're like, oh, that's worth it. And that's a brilliant plan, and we don't even understand all its facets, but you can read a passage like this and just go, wow, I get it. Like,
Yeah.
I see God's sovereignty in all of it. And
That's right.
It's incredible that it results in that.
Exactly. And it makes his glory that much more glorious.
Yeah.
if you know what we've been redeemed from and what Christ did to redeem us. And the blackness of sin makes the whiteness of God's glory more brilliant, right? So that's what you're saying is actually evil glorifies God. Not because he delights in evil, but the existence of evil creates a greater contrast so that his glorious nature is more displayed. It's like what you, ladies, when you go to the jewelry store and you look at diamonds or whatever, what do they do? What do they put behind that? What? The black velvet, right? Maybe not diamonds or whatever you look at.
Weekly trip.
Yeah, they put the blue or the black velvet behind it. Why? Because it makes it shine even more brilliantly. And that's, I think, what you're referring to. So, yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
I was just gonna add, like, in the, going through Genesis with the kids, you know, it's hard to explain that there was light before the sun and moon were created.
Yeah.
But there was.
There was.
And so it's just fascinating that, like, full circle, here we are, like,
Yep.
that's the way that God created it.
Yep.
That his glory illuminated the earth, and he just created the sun and moon as markers or as symbols.
Yep.
And we're going back. It's just kind of
Exactly right.
from Genesis to Revelation. It's just
Yep.
I just made that connection. It's just cool.
Yeah, so what day did God create the sun and the moon?
I should know
One
what
of them days.
Day 4.
Yeah.
Day 4. But we know that there was light on days 1, 2, and 3. Where'd that light come from?
Oh, yeah.
Not the sun.
That's from him.
From him.
Yeah.
From his glory. His glory illuminated days 1, 2, and 3 of creation. So you don't need a sun to light things up. You just need the glory of God. Which, exactly right. It's a reversal. It's a reversal now from Genesis to Revelation, and now that created sun is no longer necessary because it's God's glory. It's going to illuminate. Yeah, Lauren.
I was just thinking about when you're talking about his glory and that catechism, that question that's like, what is man's chief end? To
Yeah.
glorify God and enjoy him forever. And thinking how even the contrast to here on earth is like, I mean, in a lot of ways that's what sin is enjoying something other than God and thinking that other things are going to give us pleasure and enjoyment and that they're going to satisfy and they don't. And
Right.
that another wonderful thing about heaven is that he will behold his glory, will truly be giving him glory because there will be the absence of sin, and we really will enjoy him in the purest sense, which is
Yeah.
a beautiful thing to think about. And
Yep.
we really will treasure him. We really will. There'll be nothing else in trying to compete, you know, for our affections. It'll be really pure, and
Exactly.
I think that's just such a cool thought to realize that our enjoyment and our satisfaction will really be the, you know, in a sense, that striving that we spend our lives kind of
Mhm.
pursuing. Even as Christians, we try so hard it's easy to get sidetracked and
Yep.
distracted, and that won't even be there anymore. And that sounds like rest, you know, like just rest
Yeah.
of the striving and rest from,
Yeah.
you know, things vying for our affections and having to, like, you know, it's like you'll realize after a while, like, oh man, I've been like pursuing, kind of gone off on this rabbit trail and then having to like reorient yourself and
We fight that. and-
repentant. Yeah, all of that stuff is just, I mean,
Yeah.
that's true rest, to not even have
Yeah.
that.
Exactly.
There. That's
Yeah, we're
awesome.
constantly having to reel our affections back in.
Yeah.
Right? We're reel them in from being satisfied in this part of the world and this part of the world. We have to reel them back in and almost re-preach to ourselves. No, God satisfies me. Not that music, not that movie, not that pornography, whatever it is, not that lustful thought or that emotional thought. Those things don't satisfy me. What satisfies me is God himself. And so I like what you said, that in the eternal state, we're not going to be fighting our affections. We're not going to have divided interests. It's just going to be complete and total satisfaction in God himself. And I like what you said. It's rest. That's rest. That will be restful.
Yeah.
That will be good. All right, let's end on this section, see if we can just finish this next section, and we'll wrap it all up next week. The construction of this new heavens and new earth, well, specifically the construction of this new heavenly city, capital city. Verses 12 to 14 say this capital city, New Jerusalem, had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names were written upon them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the son of Israel. There were 3 gates on the east, and 3 gates on the north, and 3 gates on the south, and 3 gates on the west. And the wall of the city had 12 foundation stones, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So here's its construction. You want to know, what is this city going to look like? Well, it's going to have a great and high wall. We know that. Skip down to verse 17. It tells us that those walls are 72 feet, or 72 yards, rather. Look at verse 17. He measured its wall 72 yards. We don't know if quite that means the width or the height. Either way, they're massive walls. So there are walls that surround this new capital city.
It was a cube, wasn't it?
And it's a cube.
It's a cube.
So we'll look at that in just a minute. It is a cube.
So,
Yep. So there's walls around this massive cube. It has 12 gates. Verse 12 tells us 12 gates. Oh, by the way, back on the walls. What do walls do in this life?
They keep
I was
people
just gonna
out.
ask you that. You read it?
We probably should talk about that. What do walls do?
They keep people out.
They keep people out. So why do you have walls in the new heaven and new earth? Do you need to keep people out?
I hope not.
No, not at all. So there are no enemies in heaven, since they've all been cast into the lake of the fire. So it may just be that they symbolize the security of our eternal home. Not that you need to be protected from anything, because there's no threats in heaven, there's no enemies, but you are secure. You are dwelling in a place that is absolutely secure. So you have these walls, then you have 12 gates. And what do we know about these gates? We know that, first of all, that there's 3 gates on each side. So 3 in the north, south, east, and west for a total of 12. And we know from verse 21, skip down to verse 21, that the gates are actually 12 pearls. And as John said, this is a cube, about 1,400 miles length, width, height. So it's a 1,400 mile cube. And these pearls are probably the full distance height of this cube. So you've got 1,400 mile high pearl gates. That's a big pearl. That's a big clam. But obviously these don't come from clams or oysters. Look at the bottom of page 6. Some commentators actually suggest that because a pearl is formed through the oyster's pain, the pearl may symbolize Christ's suffering on our behalf, as well as the eternal beauty that can come out of our temporary suffering. Maybe we're reading into it too much, but there's a reason he picks a pearl here. Pearls come from a little piece of sand or an irritant in an oyster. They coat it with this pearl substance, and they make this beautiful pearl. That's what it comes from. But it comes from an irritation. It comes from a suffering. It comes from some pain. And perhaps these massive pearl gates are reminders of the fact that our life was full of suffering, but there is a Savior who also suffered and secured our salvation. So it could be a reference to that. So there are gates, or walls rather, there are 12 gates, and each of those gates, it says, has a name written on it, which are the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. So each of those gates has one of the 12 tribes of the name of Israel on it. And then notice verse 14. It says, the wall of the city had 12 foundation stones, and on them were the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So not only do you have the 12 tribes of Israel represented, you also have the 12 apostles represented. So you have the nation of Israel and you have the church, both represented in this capital city. Think about that. So you have the redeemed people of God now identified as one people of God, united in one place and brought together in this heavenly city. So top of page 7, just a couple things here more on the gates. If you skip down to verse 25, it says that there will be no night there, and its gates will never be closed. Again, what do you need gates for? Gates keep people out, but these gates are never closed. So it means there's no threat to your security. So there's something wonderful about this heavenly city. There's no need to close the gates. Back up in verse 12, it tells us that an angel is stationed at each one of those gates, but not for security, just, again, a display of God's glory. So the city's always open. The gates are always open. You can come, you can go. Whenever you want, you come, you go. And so there's no metal detectors. There's no admissions tickets. I was in court today and had to go through a metal detector to go to court. Had to get all my stuff out of my pockets just to walk in the federal building. And so there's none of that. No admissions tickets, no fences to look through. It's all equal access. It's open to everybody. So, and then look at verse 15 to 17. We'll end with this. It's measurements. It's measurements. So what is it going to be like in terms of its size? Verse 15 says, "The one who spoke with me had a gold measuring rod to measure the city and its gates and its wall. The city is laid out as a square, and its length is as great as its width. And he measured the city with the rod, 1,500 miles. Its length and its width and its height are equal. And he measured its wall 72 yards according to human measurements, which are also angelic measurements." So back up to verse 17, we learned that this is a 1,500-mile wide, tall, and long cube. Now just think about that. This is how big this city is, which is about the distance from the Canadian border down to the Gulf of Mexico and about from Colorado to the Atlantic Ocean. It's roughly 1,500 miles square, and then you have to go up 1,500 miles. Think about that, 1,500 miles straight up. That's how massive this city is. And verse 17 says these measurements. Some people just think, well, these are just symbolic measurements, 1,500 miles. Maybe your version has stadia. I think it's 1,200 stadia is the actual terminology, which is about, it's actually closer to 1,400 miles than 1,500 miles. But some people think that, and the 72 yards of the walls in verse 17, they think those are just symbolic. They're just saying it's big. But notice the last phrase in verse 17, according to human measurements, which are also angelic measurements. Don't you love that? He says it's all the same. A foot is a foot, a mile is a mile, a yard is a yard. So these are not symbols. These are literal numbers. That's how big this city is. It's literally a 1,500-mile cube. And so this is a massive structure, and it will be your eternal dwelling place.
It talks about it being 1,500 miles length, width, and height. Could the 72 yards be the depth of the wall?
Yeah.
How deep the wall is?
Yeah. That's what most commentators think. Not tall, but width. Right. Yeah,
like
exactly.
when you're walking through it, you got to walk 70 that far to get to the other side of the wall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a thick wall.
It's a thick
I mean,
wall.
that's 75 yards. Think of a football field. It's just 25 yards short of that. Really quickly, let me end with this. This is kind of interesting. Did a little math. So I did a little math. How many people can fit in the new capital city? So some people say, is this going to be big enough for all the Christians, all the Old Testament saints, everyone who's ever been saved for all millennia? Is it going to be big enough? So watch this. 1,500 miles square. So 1,500 by 1,500, just think of length times width, is about 2 million square miles. To put that in comparison, the city of Grand Rapids is 45 square miles, and it has about 200,000 people. Top of page 8. Kent County is 872 square miles and has about 650,000 people. That's where it gets really fun. The city of Grand Rapids has a population density of about 4,365 people per square mile. So if we apply the same population density of Grand Rapids to the new city using just the 2 million square miles of length times width, you get a population of 8.7 billion people that can live. That's not even including 1,500 miles straight up. So, if you include the 1,500 miles in height, it comes out to 3.4 billion cubic miles. So what was it before? Length times width was 2 million square miles. Now when you add the height, you get 3.4 billion cubic miles. And if you use the same population density for that, you can accommodate 10 trillion people. I actually did it the first time, and my little calculator went E. Can't handle that big of a number. So this will be plenty big. There will be plenty of room for everyone who will reside in the new heavenly city.
That's just the city.
And that's just the city. Yeah, that's not the earth. This is just the city that comes down from heaven, and so there will be plenty of room for everyone who's saved. I think we'll stop there. And what we'll do next week is we'll pick up for the rest of this section, and then we will finish with chapter 22 and just wrap it up next week. So, yeah, Rachel?
Just concerning, so I think another, but there will be no reproduction in the eternal kingdom, right? We won't be reproducing at that point.
Not in the
So-
eternal state.
Not in eternal state, so it's not like, I mean, it's not like he has to accommodate for like the growing masses. It's like whoever's left, or yeah, that's it, you know.
That's
and,
it.
It's gonna be basically anyone's who is conceived or, you know, created in the millennial kingdom, right?
Well, there's reproduction in the millennial kingdom,
Right, so
but the
like,
inhabitants of the eternal state will be every saved person who's ever lived.
Oh, duh.
Yeah, who's ever lived.
I'm thinking all these people that just got wiped out. I'm like, well, how much could there be?
No, this goes all the way back to the beginning of creation.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
Why you would need room for 8.7 billion people.
Exactly. Yeah. All right, thanks everyone. So come back next week. We'll wrap things up and give you some more good news next week. All right?
So,